Hello and welcome to another episode of A Guide to D&D Worldbuilding. This episode is Kingdoms and Factions. Now firstly I should mention that kingdoms can take a pivotal role in your world building and will likely be an aspect your players will interact with the most. So consider emphasising on fleshing out your kingdoms, as it will be a place your players will likely explore and spend some of their adventuring time in. So this episode I will be giving some main points and directions on how to develop your kingdom. But you might want to find other resources online to aid with doing the more complex and detailed parts. So, the first thing when fleshing out your kingdom and expanding upon it is to have a good understanding of all aspects, so that when your players explore it and they decide to show an interest in its custom and history, you have answers to that and make it so that the players feel rewarded for putting interest in something you've made. The first thing to consider is your kingdom's theme. Now, I'm going to use the term kingdom in this video loosely. Obviously, a kingdom is typically ruled by a monarchy, but I'm simply referring to a territory ruled by a nation. So when I mention kingdom in these videos, it might not necessarily mean that I specifically am referring to a kingdom. Now, your kingdom could be the theme of a typical fantasy with knights serving under lords and ladies, or it could be a large expansive empire that's ruled by a great emperor, worshipped by the people like a god. Perhaps your kingdom could be a majocracy, which is influenced with magic in all of its different aspects. The theme will most likely be influenced by the surroundings, such as if a kingdom is in the cold north, the culture will probably be an emphasis on hardiness and being able to live and thrive in such a harsh climate. If your kingdom is situated in a warm southern desert, then maybe there'll be emphasis on resources so that the people can survive. It's worth considering what is special about your kingdom. The first thing the players will identify when visiting that place. Is a kingdom well known for mining and acquiring rich ores? Or is it well known for its exotic animals that the citizens have as pets? You can really go in any direction with this. You can just start with thinking about what a kingdom thrives off, such as its sailing or farming or merchants. Or you could think about what makes the kingdom so interesting. Maybe all of its cities float in the sky magically. Or maybe your kingdom is a more advanced civilization than others, using mechanical and technological advancements that other kingdoms don't possess. It could even be worth considering, do monsters have civilizations? Is there a kingdom of orcs and ogres? Could there be a kingdom of mind flayers deep underground? When considering your kingdom, think about how it's going to fit into your campaign. Use it for the situations you require. For instance, if you're running a campaign that you know your players will be spending almost all their time in this one city, then maybe make it a city-state instead, rather than a kingdom, and expand more into the depth within that city. You should try and think about each kingdom, such as its size, how old it is, what they are allied with, who they are enemies with. This will all grant more questions as well as answers, and those questions will grant you more points to consider and expand upon. It could be good to even create kingdoms that are far away, that are only just mentioned offhand by NPCs. You don't have to expand on these ones as much, but having your players learn about them, these faraway places, can make the world feel more expansive and real. Your players probably won't get to see every single continent that your world has, but there obviously are kingdoms there that should be mentioned. Making the world feel like it exists outside what the players see and do is really important for a world to feel real and alive. Another thing to consider is maybe there are conflicts happening between nations in the background. These things can maybe hardly affect the player's story, but it can introduce small moments. Maybe a road is blocked by an army outpost due to this conflict, therefore meaning the players have to go around it. This will build a sense of a story around your players, and maybe they might get themselves more involved in the world's politics. It'll be very likely, especially if you run a roleplay heavy game, that your players will want to know what kingdom they come from. So consider how that can influence their backstory, as well as your day-to-day sessions. For example, if one of your players comes from a kingdom that the rest of the party are strangers to, they can act as a guide and they have common knowledge that the rest of the group won't. This will make for a rewarding experience for that player, as they feel they have more of a connection to the world. Think about some things that maybe the players would know of faraway kingdoms. Maybe they've heard of a tyrant that rules with cruelty over their people. Maybe there is a rebellion forming that the players can become involved with to try and help overthrow the dictator, making for an interesting questline and plot hook. It will help the players feel more rewarded when they are part of the world's history and help influence events. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about in this video was factions. Now, factions differ from kingdoms as they aren't necessarily constricted by the borders of each kingdom. A faction could in theory be a bridge that you can use for your players to go from one kingdom to another, as both kingdoms may house that faction. Some factions may go across entire continents, or some may be very local. Now, I want to mention organisations in terms of how they may reflect in classes. Is there a spy faction full of rogues and thieves? Is there a mage faction full of scholars and sages? Or is there a warrior faction full of fighters and hunters? Factions can give a lot of motivation to your players. If they can join them, they can try and rise up the ranks and maybe be offered more resources such as money, maybe a guild house, benefits with that city, or maybe even have servants that work under them, like squires. Creating guilds can make a lot of conflict within a nation. If you're running a campaign with maybe a smaller scope, maybe you only have it staged in one kingdom, then factions can provide the similar type of conflict that each nation would have with each other as they have with themselves. Putting your party in the middle of this Game of Thrones-esque coup of each faction fighting it out against one another can be very fun for the players to pick a side or maybe just be stuck in the middle. As a world builder, try and think about what a faction's core motives are, try and think about their rules or their ideals, think about their leaders, and also think about what opposes their ideals. If they're a faction that completely is the opposite to them, do your factions fight openly in the streets, or do they fight in the dark and in subterfuge? Factions can give a kingdom depth, so try to balance both. Typically, you would only want a handful of factions per kingdom, if that. Those are my suggestions for how I would go about with designing a kingdom and factions within my world. I hope this was very useful for you guys, and let me know in the comments if you have any more ideas. Thanks for watching. Until next time.